When people win their independence and break away from their colonial overlords, they normally take their entire country with them. Yet, when Ireland successfully revolted against its inclusion within the United Kingdom, it did not. This chunk in the north remains to this day a part of the United Kingdom, despite it previously being administratively a part of Ireland, which raises a pretty obvious question. Why didn't Ireland take the north with it? Why is Ireland divided? Well, first of all, we need to go back to the 17th century. This was when the English and Scottish thrones were held by the same man, James I. James was also the King of Ireland, at least in name, and he wanted much greater control over it. His problem was that he was a Protestant king with Catholic subjects whom he felt were much more loyal to Rome than they were to him, mostly because they were. As such, he seized lands in the north and gave them to Protestant settlers. A process which over the centuries changed the religious demographics in the north. And over those centuries, the Protestants held much greater rights within Ireland than the majority Catholic population. Political office was reserved for Protestants, whereas Catholics couldn't own land nor could they practice their faith or speak their own language without harassment. In the early 19th century, British leadership feared rebellion and so passed numerous reform acts which gave many of these rights back to Catholics. As of the 1860s, there were those in Ireland who pushed for what was called Home Rule, which meant that Ireland would remain in the UK but with autonomy over the laws that governed it. The British said no and would continue to do so for the next 60 years. This position was buoyed by those living in the north who didn't see themselves as Irish but as British, and so opposed anything that could potentially separate Ireland from Westminster. In 1912, the pro-British population living in the north, called Unionists, signed what was called the Ulster Covenant. This was a document signed by 500,000 people, and it essentially threatened civil war if Ireland was given any autonomy. World War I gave both sides something else to think about briefly, but during the conflict the Easter Rising broke out. This was a semi-spontaneous uprising which wasn't popular amongst the Irish and was put down quickly and brutally by the British. The brutality of the response, as well as the quick and not very professional execution of the uprising's leaders, further galvanised the Irish people against British rule. In 1918, elections were held in Ireland in which Sinn Féin, a pro-independence party, won an overwhelming victory. They created an Irish parliament and promptly declared independence, which meant war. Long story short, the Irish won, but Britain refused to give up the north due to the wishes of the majority of the people living there, and also land. As such, Britain passed the Government of Ireland Act, which split Ireland into two new parts of the United Kingdom, Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland, which was by this point independent, and so its leaders didn't care what the British Parliament had to say about it. Northern Ireland was given these boundaries, which the British Parliament chose because they were reasonably the most that they could keep whilst guaranteeing a unionist majority there. In mid-1921, both sides agreed to a ceasefire whilst they created a lasting peace. And it was decided that Britain would recognise Irish independence on two conditions. The first was that Ireland agreed to Britain keeping the north, and second was that Ireland would retain the British monarchy. And Irish leadership agreed to these conditions, although it split Sinn Féin and pushed Ireland into a civil war. The pro-treaty side won, and after that point the island of Ireland was divided between the two nations, and barring a drunken offer from Churchill, reunion has never come close to being a reality.